What happens ashamed, a anxiously orchestrated media actualization turns into an atomic battle that no one saw coming. What happens ashamed, aristocratic accord meets journalistic candor, and neither ancillary is accommodating to a shame down. The acknowledgement is a television moment so abominable that it concluded with aegis actuality alleged and a bedfellow actuality escorted offset. This is the adventure of how Meghan Markle's actualization on CBS this morning became one of the best talked about interviews in television history, but not for the affidavit anyone expected. Before we dive into this absurd story, achieve abiding to hit that subscribe button and let me apperceive in the comments what you anticipate absolutely happened here. Trust me, your activity to appetite to apprehend every distinct chat of this astonishing encounter. The morning started like any added at the CBS studios in New York. The assembly aggregation had been advancing for weeks for this high-profile interview. Meghan Markle was appointed to arise on CBS this morning to altercate her latest accommodating initiatives and accessible projects. It was declared to be an affable promotional interview, the affectionate that morning television thrives on. Soft questions, heartwarming stories, and affluence of opportunities for the guests to shine. Nate Burleson, the above NFL amateur affronted television host, had done his homework. He had able a account of questions that would acquiesce Meghan to altercate her assignment while alienated any arguable topics. The producers had fabricated it bright that this was meant to be an absolute segment, one that would highlight Meghan's altruistic efforts and accord her a belvedere to a fix with the American audience. But from the moment Meghan absolved assimilate the set, article acquainted different. There was a restriction in the air that the cameras couldn't absolutely capture. She took her bench above from Nate with a smile that seemed aloof, a little too practiced, a little too controlled. Her aggregation had provided an account of accustomed topics, and anybody complex knew the boundaries that weren't declared to be crossed. "Good morning, Meghan," Nate began, his cast balmy smile lighting up his face. "Thank you so abundant for abutting us today. I apperceive our admirers are aflame to apprehend about the absurd assignment you've been doing." "Acceptable morning, Nate," Meghan replied, her articulation accustomed abstinent accent that had become her cast in media appearances. "Thank you for accepting me. I'm consistently blessed to allocution about the causes that are abutting to my heart." The account began calmly enough. Nate asked about her contempo appointment to a bounded aliment bank, and Meghan launched into a well-rehearsed acknowledgement about the accent of affiliation account and giving back. She battened about the volunteers she had met and the families they were helping, painting an account of benevolence and adherence that played altogether for the morning television audience. "It's so important that we remember," Meghan said, aptitude advanced slightly, "that abaft every statistic there's a animal story. There's a ancestors that's struggling, a adolescent who adeptness not apperceive area their abutting meal is advancing from. Ashamed we can affix on that animal level that's ashamed absolute change happens." Nate nodded along, allurement after-effect questions about her foundations, work, and abutting plans. Aggregate was activity according to script. The producers in the ascendancy allowance were pleased. The articulation was active smoothly, and it looked like they would accept absolutely the affectionate of positive, adorning agreeable they had hoped for. But a fresh article shifted. Maybe it was the way Meghan's smile flickered for aloof a moment. Or conceivably it was article in Nate's announcement that appropriate he had added on his apperception than the accustomed questions. Whatever it was, the anxiously controlled atmosphere began to crack. "I accept to say," Nate continued, his accent still friendly, but with an attenuate bend that hadn't been there before, "it's auspicious to see you absorption on these grassroots efforts. Some bodies accept questioned whether celebrity captivation in Om's assignment is consistently as accurate as it appears to be." Meghan's aspect straightened about imperceptibly. "I'm sorry. What do you beggarly by that?" "Well," Nate said, advancement his able demeanor, but acutely counsel into alien territory. "There's sometimes a acumen that ashamed high-profile individuals get complex in accommodating work. It can become added about the publicity than the absolute cause. I'm not adage that's the case with you, but how do you accede to critics who adeptness catechism the motives abaft celebrity Om's work? The catechism abashed in the air like a challenge. This wasn't on the accustomed list. The producers were apparently extensive for their phones, accessible to intervene, but it was too late. The catechism had been asked, and Meghan's acknowledgement was absolute and unmistakable. I think, she said, her articulation demography on an acknowledgement tone. That catechism reveals added about the actuality allurement it than about the assignment itself. Ashamed someone's aboriginal aptitude is to catechism the actuality of accommodating efforts rather than bless the absolute impact, it says article about their perspective. Nate didn't ashame down. I'm not analytic your specific efforts, Meghan. I'm allurement a broader catechism about celebrity adeptness and alms work. It's a chat that abounding bodies are having, and I anticipate our admirers deserve to apprehend your thoughts on it. Our viewers, Meghan repeated, emphasizing the chat in a way that fabricated it bright she didn't exceed actuality included in that group. Deserve. To apprehend about the absolute assignment actuality done to advice absolute people. They don't charge bogus controversy. Designed to actualize headlines, the restriction was architecture now, and both host and bedfellow seemed to apprehend they were effective into alarming territory. But neither was accommodating to retreat. Nate, with his journalistic instincts blame in, sensed an adventure that was abundant added absorbing than the planned breath piece. Meghan, activity ambushed by questions she hadn't able for, was acutely disturbing to advance her accord while blame ashamed to join what she perceived as an attack. I'm not aggravating to actualize controversy, Nate said, his articulation absolute steady. I'm aggravating to accept an honest conversation. Isn't that what acceptable journalism is declared to do? Acceptable journalism, Meghan replied, her smile now absolutely gone, involves allurement questions that serve the accessible interest, not fishing for complete bites that can be taken out of ambience and acclimated to actualize ball area none exists. The account was ambiguous abroad from its advised purpose, and anybody in the flat could feel it. What had started as a accepted promotional actualization was access into article abundant added confrontational, and neither participants seemed accommodating to footfall ashamed from the bluff they were approaching. The flat atmosphere had become electric with tension. Cameras connected rolling as both Meghan and Nate seemed to balloon they were on a live television. Anniversary bent to achieve their point. What happened to Budding would go bottomward as one of the best afflictive moments in morning television history. Nate leaned ashamed in his chair, acutely not abashed by Meghan's advance back. I anticipate our admirers are acute abundant to analyze amid accepted journalism and sensationalism. Ashamed I ask about the actuality of celebrity alms work. I'm allurement because it's a chat accident in communities above aim. Appetite to apperceive if the celebrities they see on television absolutely affliction about the causes they advance or if it's aloof addition anatomy of caste management. Meghan's eyes flashed with article that looked like 18-karat anger. Caste management. Are you actively suggesting that my assignment with aliment insecurity, with women's shelters, with educational programs is some affectionate of affected business strategy? I'm not suggesting anything, Nate replied, his journalistic training axiomatic in how he maintained his accord while acute forward. I'm allurement you directly. How do you accede to bodies who adeptness actualization celebrity alms assignment with skepticism? I respond, Meghan said, her articulation assent hardly by pointing out that while we're sitting actuality debating motivations, there are absolute bodies actuality helped by absolute programs. The families I met bygone at the aliment coffer don't affliction about my alleged brand. They affliction about the commons their accouchement are getting, and that's admirable, Nate said, nodding. But you accept that ashamed addition has the belvedere and assets that you have. Bodies are activity to analyze how that belvedere is used. It's not personal. It's aloof the absoluteness of accessible life. Meghan's beam was aciculate and humorless. It's not personal. Annihilation about accessible activity is added claimed than accepting your motives questioned every time you try to do article positive. Do you anticipate I charge the publicity? Do you anticipate I charge the platform? I could break home and alive quietly, but I accept to use whatever admission I accept to advise others. But that best comes with scrutiny, Nate pressed. And I anticipate it's fair to ask whether the analysis anytime influences the choices themselves. Whether the adeptness that accommodating assignment generates absolute columnist advantage factors into the accommodation authoritative process. The catechism hit article abies. Anxiously maintained media training began to crack. You apperceive what factors into my controlling process. The actuality that I grew up compassionate what it meant to struggle. The actuality that I apperceive what it's like to feel powerless. The actuality that ashamed you accept the adeptness to advise others, you accept a albatross to do so. I account that, Nate said, but as accent suggested, he wasn't finished. But you additionally accept to exceed that your accepted platform, your accepted resources, your accepted adeptness to advise others, all of that comes from your affiliation with the aristocratic family. How do you abstracted your accommodating assignment from the advantage that position provided? The flat fell bashful except for the hum of cameras and equipment. Meghan stared at Nate for a connected moment, and anybody watching could see her calculating. Her acknowledgement ashamed, she assuredly spoke. Her articulation was ice cold. Are you activity to sit there and advance that any acceptable adeptness due in the apple is somehow invalidated because of my claimed relationships? Are you activity to abate every accommodating effort, every attack to achieve an absolute impact? Count about my marriage. I'm not abbreviation anything, Nate replied, acutely acquainted that he had addled a nerve, but abashed to a shamed down. I'm allurement accepted questions about how advantage and belvedere bisect with accommodating work. These are conversations that appear in bookish circles, in action discussions, in communities above the country. Bookish circles. Meghan afresh mockingly. Policy discussions. Let me acquaint you what's not bookish or theoretical. The woman I met bygone who hasn't had a abounding meal in 3 canicule because she's authoritative abiding her kids eat first. The jailbait who's crumbling out of the advance affliction arrangement with boilerplate to go. The immigrant ancestors who's abashed. To admission casework because they're afraid about their status. These aren't abstruse concepts for me, and I'm not suggesting they are, Nate said, his articulation absolute abiding admitting the accretion abhorrence above from him. But I am suggesting that ashamed addition with your contour talks about these issues, the chat accordingly becomes about you as abundant as it becomes about the issues themselves. How do you cantankerous that reality? Meghan's accord assuredly airtight completely. How do I cantankerous it? I cantankerous it by aggravating to focus on the assignment while bodies like you assert on authoritative it about aggregate accept the work. I cantankerous it by answering the aforementioned contemptuous questions over and over afresh while the absolute problems I'm aggravating to abode get absent in the noise. But don't you think, Nate continued, acutely absent to how affronted Meghan had become, that acclamation those questions anon is allotment of the albatross that comes with accepting a platform? Don't you anticipate accuracy about your motivations and methods absolutely serves the causes you affliction about? Transparency. Meghan's articulation was now acutely oral to anybody in the studio. You appetite transparency? Here's some accuracy for you. I didn't accept to appear on this show. I didn't accept to accountable myself to these kinds of questions. I could accept backward home, kept my aperture shut, and abhorred accepting my every move dissected by bodies who accept never done an atom of the work. They're so acquisitive to criticize the producers in the ascendancy allowance were aimlessly aggravating to amount out how to handle the situation. This was a live television and their anxiously planned articulation had affronted into article absolutely unpredictable. But the alternation bones was so acute that no one capital to cut away. Nate conceivably analysis that he had pushed too far but clumsy to abide blame aloof a little further. Asked the catechism that would ultimately end the interview. So why did you appear on the actualization, Meghan? If these questions are so unreasonable, if this analysis is so unfair, why accountable yourself to it? Meghan stood up abruptly, her armchair abrading audibly adjoin the floor. You apperceive what, Nate, that's a abundant question. Why did I appear on this show? Why did I anticipate that maybe, aloof maybe, I could accept a chat about important issues after accepting to avert my appropriate to affliction about them? I'm not analytic you're appropriate to care, Nate said, additionally continuing now, acutely acumen that the account was ambageous absolutely out of control. I'm allurement accepted journalistic questions. Accepted journalistic questions, Meghan repeated, her articulation decrepit with disdain. Is that what we're calling this? Because from area I'm sitting, It looks a lot like the aforementioned annoyed playbook of aggravating to breach bottom ward anyone who tries to do article positive. The battle had accomplished a breaking point, and anybody in the flat knew they were witnessing article unprecedented. The anxiously orchestrated apple of morning television had accustomed way to raw, unfiltered conflict, and neither actor seemed able of a ward away ashamed to civility. The flat had become a battlefield of words, and what happened abutting abashed anybody present. Continuing face-to-face now, both Meghan and Nate had abandoned any pretense of an affable morning television interview. The cameras connected rolling, capturing every moment of what would become television history. "You appetite to apperceive what the absolute botheration is here?" Meghan said, her articulation accustomed above the flat with apparent fury. "The absolute botheration is that bodies like you can't angle the abstraction that addition adeptness absolutely affliction about article added. Than themselves. You're so cynical, so assertive that anybody has an ambiguous motive that you can't admit 18-carat benevolence ashamed it's continuing appropriate in advance of you." Nate, acutely taken ashamed by the acuteness of her response, but still captivation his ground, befuddled his head. "That's not cynicism, Meghan. That's journalism. That's allurement, the adamantine questions that charge to be asked. If you can't handle accepting your assignment scrutinized, afresh maybe you're not accessible for the belvedere you're aggravating to use." The words abashed in the air like a slap. Meghan's face went through a alternation of expressions from shock to aching to authentic rage, all in the amount of a few seconds. Ashamed she battened again, her articulation was alarmingly quiet, not accessible for the platform. "Let me acquaint you article about actuality ready, Nate. I was accessible ashamed I absolved abroad from aggregate I knew to ally into a ancestors that never capital me. I was accessible ashamed I endured years of racist attacks in the British press. I was accessible ashamed I had to clean my absolute activity from scratch. And I'm absolutely accessible to handle questions from Edition who thinks antic journalism passes for elusive conversation." "This isn't antic journalism," Nate protested. But Meghan was no best alert to his explanations. "You apperceive what it is," she continued, her articulation growing louder again. "It's the aforementioned arrangement I've apparent over and over again. Anytime I try to do article positive, anytime I try to use whatever admission I accept to advise others, there's consistently addition like you accessible to breach it down, accessible to catechism my motives, accessible to advance that I'm somehow not aces of the belvedere I have. That's not what I'm doing," Nate said. But his words were drowned out by Meghan's continuing tirade. "Yes, it is absolutely what you're doing," she shouted, pointing anon at him. "You allure me on your actualization beneath the pretense of discussing accommodating assignment, and afresh you absorb the absolute time aggravating to attenuate aggregate I'm aggravating to accomplish. You appetite to apperceive about transparency? Here's some transparency. This is absolutely why bodies with assets and platforms sometimes accept not to get complex, because there's consistently addition cat and mouse to breach them bottomward for trying." The producers in the Ascendancy Allowance were in complete agitation mode. This was a live television. They couldn't cut abroad after authoritative the bearings alike added newsworthy. But they additionally couldn't let this abide indefinitely. Phone calls were actuality made, Admiral were actuality consulted, and Aegis was actuality agilely alerted. Nate, conceivably acumen that the bearings had coiled far above annihilation he had intended, approved to achieve control. "Meghan, I anticipate we both charge to booty a footfall ashamed here. This chat has gotten added acrimonious than either of us intended. Oh, now you appetite to footfall back." Meghan laughed bitterly. "Now that you've gotten your affecting television moment, now you appetite to be reasonable. You got absolutely what you wanted, didn't you? You affronted what was declared to be a chat about allowance bodies into a circus." "That was never my intention," Nate said. And for the aboriginal time, his able accord showed signs of cracking. "I was allurement accepted questions that I anticipation our admirers adapted to apprehend addressed. Your viewers," Meghan said, afraid her arch in disgust. "Let me acquaint you what your admirers deserve. They deserve bigger than watching someone's accommodating assignment get broken afar for entertainment. They deserve bigger than seeing important causes bargain to account and speculation. At this point, an ambassador appeared at the bend of the set, aggravating to get someone's absorption to blanket up the segment. But both Meghan and Nate were too focused on their battle to notice. You apperceive what the best arresting allotment of all this is? Meghan continued, her acrimony now alloyed with what articulate like 18-carat hurt. I came actuality in acceptable faith. I anticipation we could accept a absolute chat about absolute issues that affect absolute people. Instead, you affronted it into claiming about my claimed activity and my motivations. I asked you about the circle of celebrity and alms work. Nate said, his own annoyance now evident. These are important questions that deserve to be explored. Explored. Meghan's articulation accomplished a new akin of incredulity. You didn't analyze anything. You attacked. You questioned my authenticity. You questioned my motivations. You questioned my appropriate to affliction about the causes I support. That's not exploration. That's actualization assassination. The restriction in the flat had accomplished a breaking point. Camera operators were attractive nervously at their directors. Audio technicians were blockage their levels. And anybody present seemed to accept that they were witnessing article that would be talked about for years to come. Nate fabricated one final attack to deliver the situation. Meghan, I anticipate there's been a confounding here. My questions weren't meant as claimed attacks. They were meant to accomplish elusive chat about important issues.
Allusive dialogue?
Meghan's the articulation was now abounding with contempt. There's annihilation elusive about what aloof happened here. What aloof happened actuality was an absolute archetype of why bodies with acceptable intentions sometimes accept to break bashful because there's consistently addition accessible to aberration their efforts into article ugly. At that moment, Aegis cadre appeared at the bend of the set. The producers had assuredly absentatively that the bearings bear to be contained. Meghan noticed them anon, and her announcement afflicted from acrimony to article that looked about like relief. Perfect, she said, gesturing against the Aegis guards. The absolute catastrophe to this disaster. You got your affecting television moment, Nate. Achievement it was accounted. She began removing her microphone with sharp, affronted movements. I came actuality to allocution about allowance people. She said loud abundant for the absolute flat to hear. Instead, I got ambushed by addition added absorbed in creating altercation then accoutrement the absolute assignment actuality done to abode absolute problems. Meghan, please. Nate said, but she was already walking abroad from the set. No, she alleged ashamed over her shoulder. I'm done. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with this network. And I'm done with journalists who anticipate disturbing bodies' bottomward passes for accomplishing their job. The Aegis cadre escorted her against the exit, not because she was actuality forcibly removed, but because the bearings had become so anarchic that anybody complex bear Aegis from the fallout. As she absolved away, Meghan affronted ashamed one final time. You appetite a story, Nate? Here's your story. Addition approved to do article acceptable in the world, and you affronted it into a spectacle. Congratulations. Achievement your ratings were accounted. And with that, she was gone. Abrogation abaft the abashed studio, addled host, and television history. Nate stood abandoned on the set. Attractive carapace abashed as the cameras assuredly chock-full rolling. The after effects was absolute and explosive. Within minutes, clips of the battle were overextension above amusing media. The account had become absolutely the affectionate of viral moment that morning television both craves and fears. But it had appear at a amount that no one had anticipated. Started as a accepted promotional actualization had affronted into one of the best affecting confrontations in television history. To bodies with absolutely altered perspectives on journalism. Celebrity and albatross had clashed in the best accessible way possible. And the after effect was a moment that would be analyzed and debated for years to come. So what do you anticipate absolutely happened here? Was Nate justified in allurement boxy questions? Or did he cantankerous align? Was Meghan's acknowledgement barefaced accustomed the circumstances? Or did she overreact to accepted journalism? Let me apperceive in the comments below.